Just when the nation was preparing to say goodbye to President Edgar Lungu, everything changed. A shocking legal challenge has paused the burial, and Zambians are furious. What's really going on behind the scenes? Breaking news: Zambia is in shock as the burial of former President Edgar Chagwa Lungu has been suspended due to a sudden legal battle that no one saw coming. In this emotional and revealing video, we cover why Edgar Lungu's burial was suddenly put on hold, who is behind the legal battle, and what's at stake. Exclusive reactions from the Lungu family, PF members, and the general public. Government's official response and next steps. How this legal chaos is dividing the nation and delaying national healing. This is not just a funeral. It's a political, emotional, and legal storm that's shaking Zambia to its core. Pushpin, stay tuned and find out what the media isn't telling you about this unfolding drama. Why Edgar Lungu's burial was suddenly put on hold. The sudden suspension of former Zambian President Edgar Lungu's burial stems from a contentious legal and diplomatic dispute between the Zambian government and Lungu's family, centered on the repatriation and funeral arrangements of the late president. Edgar Lungu, Zambia's 6th president, passed away, and his death sparked a complex struggle over how and where his burial should take place. The Pretoria High Court in South Africa, where Lungu's body was reportedly located at the time, issued an injunction halting the planned private burial in South Africa, following an application by the Zambian government. This legal intervention was prompted by disagreements over the repatriation of Lungu's body to Zambia and the government's insistence on overseeing the funeral arrangements, which they argued should reflect Lungu's status as a former head of state. The core issue revolves around protocol and national pride versus family autonomy. The Zambian government, led by President Hakainde Hichilema, argued that Lungu's status as a former president necessitates a state funeral in Zambia, with the government taking a leading role in the arrangements to honor his legacy appropriately. This position is rooted in Zambian tradition, where former presidents are typically accorded state funerals, often with full military honors, to reflect their contributions to the nation. The government's stance is that allowing a private burial in South Africa would undermine national protocol and potentially set a precedent that diminishes the state's role in honoring its leaders. Conversely, Lungu's family, supported by members of his political party, the Patriotic Front (PF), expressed distrust in the government's intentions. They preferred a private burial in South Africa, citing concerns that the government might not respect their wishes or could politicize the funeral. The family's decision was influenced by a history of political tensions between Lungu's PF and Hichilema's United Party for National Development (UPND), including allegations of persecution of PF members since Hichilema took office in 2021. This distrust led the family to resist repatriation until guarantees were made about the funeral arrangements. The Pretoria High Court's ruling to halt the burial was a direct result of an injunction filed by Zambia's Attorney General Mulalo Kabesha, who argued that the government's interest in repatriating Lungu's body superseded the family's plans. The court granted the Zambian government until the following month to provide further justification for its position, effectively suspending the burial and escalating the dispute. This legal maneuver underscores the clash between state authority and familial rights, with the court acting as a neutral arbiter in a highly charged situation. The suspension also highlights logistical and diplomatic complexities. Lungu's body was in South Africa at the time of his death, possibly due to medical treatment or other personal reasons, though specific details remain unclear. The Zambian government's insistence on repatriation involves navigating international protocols, as South African authorities must comply with legal processes while respecting Zambia's sovereignty claims over its former leaders remains. The court's decision to pause the burial reflects a cautious approach to balancing these competing interests, ensuring that all parties have an opportunity to present their case. Edgar Lungu burial suspended. What happened? The suspension of Edgar Lungu's burial unfolded as a dramatic sequence of events, blending legal, political, and emotional elements. Following Lungu's death, initial discussions between the Zambian government and the Lungu family appeared to progress toward a resolution, with indications that the family was willing to allow the government to take over funeral arrangements once the body arrived in Lusaka. However, these talks broke down when the family accused the government of inconsistency and shifting positions, prompting them to pursue alternative funeral arrangements in South Africa. On June 24, 2025, the Zambian government, through Attorney General Mulalo Kabesha, filed an urgent application in the Pretoria High Court to block the planned burial in South Africa, scheduled for the following day. The government argued that Lungu's status as a former president required a state funeral in Zambia, and repatriation was necessary to honor his legacy in accordance with national traditions. The court's swift decision to grant the injunction halted the burial, leaving the family and their supporters in a state of uncertainty. The breakdown in negotiations can be traced to several factors. First, the Lungu family's distrust of the government's motives was exacerbated by prior political conflicts. Since losing the 2021 election, Lungu and the PF have accused the Hichilema administration of targeting opposition figures through arrests and legal actions, creating a backdrop of suspicion. The family's insistence on a private burial in South Africa was partly a reaction to fears that the government might use the funeral to score political points or marginalize Lungu's legacy. Second, the government's rigid stance on protocol may have overlooked the family's emotional and cultural preferences. preferences. The Lungu family, through PF Acting President Lungu, expressed frustration over the lack of clear communication about when and how the body would be repatriated, further straining relations. The government's announcement that Lungu's body would arrive on a specific date contradicted the family's understanding, deepening the stalemate. The suspension has left the process in limbo, with the Pretoria High Court serving as the battleground for resolving the dispute. The court's decision to give the Zambian government until the following month to justify its position indicates a prolonged legal process, delaying closure for the family and the nation. This situation has also drawn international attention, as it raises questions about state authority, family rights, and the handling of a former leader's legacy in a politically polarized environment. Who is behind the legal battle, and what's at stake? The legal battle over Edgar Lungu's burial pits the Zambian government, represented by Attorney General Mulalo Kabesha, against the Lungu family, supported by key figures in the Patriotic Front (PF). The government initiated the legal action by filing an injunction in the Pretoria High Court to prevent the family from proceeding with a private burial in South Africa. Kabesha's argument hinges on the state's responsibility to honor a former president with a funeral that reflects national protocol, emphasizing Zambia's sovereignty and the symbolic importance of repatriating Lungu's body. The Lungu family, backed by PF leaders like Lungu, counters that they have the right to determine the burial arrangements, particularly given their distrust of the government's intentions. The family's position is rooted in their desire to protect Lungu's legacy from potential politicization and to ensure the funeral aligns with their personal and cultural preferences. The PF has rallied behind the family, framing the government's actions as an overreach of authority and a sign of disrespect toward a grieving family. At stake are several critical issues: national protocol versus family autonomy. The dispute raises fundamental questions about who has the authority to decide a former president's funeral arrangements. The government views Lungu's burial as a matter of national significance, requiring state oversight to uphold Zambia's traditions and dignity. The family, however, sees this as an infringement on their personal rights, arguing that they should have the final say over their loved one's burial. Political tensions. The legal battle exacerbates existing divisions between the UPND government and the PF opposition. The PF has accused the Hichilema administration of using the funeral dispute to marginalize Lungu's legacy and weaken the opposition. This perception risks further polarizing Zambia's political landscape, with potential long-term consequences for national unity. International diplomacy. The involvement of a South African court complicates matters, as it requires coordination between Zambian and South African authorities. The case tests the diplomatic relationship between the two countries, particularly regarding the handling of a foreign dignitary's remains. A misstep could strain bilateral ties or set a precedent for similar disputes in the region. Public perception and national healing. Lungu's death, as a significant national event, was expected to unite Zambians in mourning. However, the legal battle has delayed closure and fueled public outrage, with many viewing the government's actions as insensitive. The outcome of this dispute will shape public trust in the government and its ability to handle sensitive national matters. Legacy of Edgar Lungu. The manner in which Lungu's burial is conducted will influence how his presidency is remembered. A state funeral could cement his legacy as a respected national figure, while a private burial might reflect the family's desire to shield him from political manipulation. The resolution of this conflict will set a precedent for how Zambia honors its former leaders. Legal battle. Who filed the case and why? The legal battle was initiated by Zambia's Attorney General Mulalo Kabesha, who filed an injunction in the Pretoria High Court on June 24, 2025, to stop the planned burial of Edgar Lungu in South Africa. The government's primary argument is that Lungu, as a former president, is entitled to a state funeral in Zambia, which requires the repatriation of his body and government oversight of the arrangements. Kabesha contended that allowing a private burial in South Africa would violate Zambian protocol and diminish the nation's ability to honor one of its former leaders appropriately. The government's case rests on several legal and cultural grounds. State protocol. In Zambia, former presidents are typically accorded state funerals, which include military honors and public ceremonies to reflect their service to the nation. The government argues that Lungu's burial must follow this tradition to maintain national dignity and consistency. Sovereignty. The government views the repatriation of Lungu's body as a matter of national sovereignty, asserting that Zambia has the right to bring its former leaders' remains home for a proper farewell. This position is particularly significant given that Lungu's body was in South Africa at the time of his death, raising questions about jurisdiction. Public interest. The government claims that a state funeral would allow Zambians to pay their respects and participate in mourning, fostering national unity. A private burial abroad, they argue, would exclude the public and potentially alienate Lungu's supporters. The Lungu family, supported by the PF, opposes the government's intervention, arguing that it infringes on their rights to decide the burial arrangements. They have expressed distrust in the government's motives, citing a history of political animosity between the UPND and PF. The family's decision to pursue a private burial in South Africa was motivated by concerns that the government might use the funeral to advance its political agenda or downplay Lungu's contribution. The Pretoria High Court's decision to grant the injunction reflects its role as a neutral arbiter in a dispute with international implications. By halting the burial burial and giving the Zambian government until the following month to justify its position, the court has ensured that both sides have an opportunity to present their arguments, so this has prolonged the uncertainty surrounding Lungu's funeral. Exclusive reactions from the Lungu family, PF members, and the general public. Lungu family reactions and statements. The Lungu family has been vocal about their frustration and grief over the government's actions. Through PF Acting President Edgar Lungu, they have expressed a desire for a dignified burial that respects their wishes and Lungu's legacy. The family initially appeared open to allowing the government to take over funeral arrangements once the body reached Lusaka, but they accused the government of changing its position and failing to communicate clearly. This led them to pursue alternative arrangements in South Africa, only to be halted by the court's injunction. In a statement reported on June 18, 2025, the family resolved not to repatriate Lungu's body due to their lack of trust in the government's commitment to honoring their wishes. They emphasized their desire for a burial that reflects Lungu's personal and cultural values, free from political interference. The family's stance has been one of defiance, asserting their right to control the process despite the government's legal maneuvers. The emotional toll on the family has been significant. The legal battle has delayed their ability to lay Lungu to rest, prolonging their grief and exposing them to public scrutiny. Their statements reflect a sense of betrayal, particularly given the government's insistence on taking over the arrangements without, in their view, adequate consultation. PF members' reactions. The Patriotic Front, Lungu's political party, has rallied behind the family, framing the government's actions as an attack on Lungu's legacy and the opposition. PF Acting President Edgar Lungu has been a key spokesperson, accusing the government of disrespecting the family's wishes and exploiting the situation for political gain. The PF has used the dispute to highlight what they see as the UPND's authoritarian tendencies, pointing to the legal action as evidence of overreach. PF members have also expressed concern that the government's insistence on a state funeral is a ploy to control the narrative around Lungu's legacy. They fear that the UPND might downplay Lungu's achievements or use the funeral to project an image of unity under Hichilema's leadership, marginalizing the opposition in the process. The PF's rhetoric has resonated with their supporters, who see the legal battle as a continuation of the political persecution they claim to have faced since 2021. General public reactions. Public sentiment, as reflected in posts on X and other sources, is deeply divided and marked by confusion and outrage. Many Zambians view the legal battle as an unnecessary escalation that disrespects both Lungu's memory and his family's grief. Social media posts, such as one by Glenn Pani, have criticized the government for dragging a grieving family to court, calling it a painful indictment of failed leadership. This sentiment reflects a broader frustration with the politicization of Lungu's death, with many feeling that the government's actions have turned a moment of national mourning into a divisive spectacle. Supporters of the PF have been particularly vocal, accusing the Hichilema administration of insensitivity and authoritarianism. They argue that the government's insistence on repatriation and a state funeral disregards the family's wishes and risks alienating Lungu's base. Conversely, some UPND supporters defend the government's position, arguing that a state funeral is necessary to honor Lungu's contributions and ensure national unity. These divisions highlight the polarized state of Zambian politics, with Lungu's burial becoming a flashpoint for broader tensions. The general public's confusion stems from the lack of clear communication from both the government and the family. Contradictory statements about the timing of repatriation and the nature of the funeral arrangements have left many Zambians uncertain about what to expect. This uncertainty has fueled frustration, with some calling for a resolution that prioritizes healing over legal battles. Government's official response and next steps. The Zambian government, through Attorney General Mulalo Kabesha, has maintained that its actions are driven by a commitment to national protocol and the public interest. In its application to the Pretoria High Court, the government argued that Lungu's status as a former president necessitates a state funeral in Zambia, with full honors to reflect his contributions to the nation. The government has emphasized that repatriation is a matter of sovereignty and that allowing a private burial abroad would set a problematic precedent. Following the court's injunction, the government was given until the following month to provide further justification for its position. This indicates that the government is preparing a detailed legal argument, likely focusing on Zambian laws governing the treatment of former presidents and international protocols for repatriating a dignitary's remains. The government has also signaled its willingness to work with the Lungu family to find a resolution, though these efforts have been hampered by mutual distrust. The government's next steps include legal proceedings. The government will need to present a compelling case to the Pretoria High Court, demonstrating why repatriation and a state funeral are in the national interest. This may involve citing Zambian constitutional provisions, historical precedents, and diplomatic agreements with South Africa. Engagement with the family. Despite the legal battle, the government has expressed a desire to negotiate with the Lungu family to reach a mutually acceptable solution. This could involve guarantees about the funeral's format, such as ensuring the family's input or allowing PF members to participate prominently. Public communication. To address public outrage and confusion, the government may need to improve its communication strategy, clarifying its intentions and emphasizing its respect for Lungu's legacy. Transparent updates updates on the legal process and negotiations could help mitigate accusations of insensitivity. The government's handling of this situation will be closely watched, as it risks further alienating Lungu's supporters and deepening political divisions. A misstep could damage President Hichilema's reputation as a unifying leader, while a successful resolution could strengthen his administration's credibility. Public outrage and confusion. The public's reaction to the suspension of Lungu's burial has been marked by significant outrage and confusion, reflecting the deep emotional and political resonance of the issue. Social media platforms, particularly X, have become a space for Zambians to express their frustration, with many criticizing the government for escalating the situation into a legal battle. A post by Glenn Pani captured this sentiment, questioning the leadership that would drag a grieving family to court over a burial and describing the dispute as a failure of governance. The outrage stems from several factors. Perceived insensitivity. Many Zambians feel that the government's legal action disrespects the Lungu family's grief and turns a solemn moment into a political spectacle. The decision to involve a foreign court has been particularly contentious, as it underscores the government's determination to override the family's wishes. Political polarization. The dispute has reignited tensions between PF and UPND supporters, with each side accusing the other of exploiting Lungu's death for political gain. PF supporters view the government's actions as an attempt to marginalize Lungu's legacy, while UPND supporters argue that a state funeral is necessary to honor him appropriately. This polarization has deepened public divisions, making it harder for the nation to mourn collectively. Lack of clarity. Contradictory statements from the government and the family have fueled confusion about the status of Lungu's body and the funeral arrangements. For example, the government's announcement that the body would arrive on a specific date was contradicted by the family's claim that no such agreement existed, leaving the public uncertain about the process. The confusion has been compounded by the international dimension of the dispute. The involvement of a South African court has raised questions about why Lungu's body was in South Africa and how the legal process will unfold. Many Zambians are frustrated by the lack of transparency and the prolonged delay in laying Lungu to rest, which they see as a barrier to national healing. How this legal chaos is dividing the nation and delaying national healing. The legal battle over Edgar Lungu's burial has significantly divided Zambia, exacerbating existing political and social tensions. Lungu's death was expected to be a moment of national unity, allowing Zambians to come together to honor a former leader. Instead, the dispute has deepened fault lines, particularly between the PF and UPND, and delayed the collective mourning process critical for national healing. Political divisions. The dispute has become a lightning rod for Zambia's polarized political landscape. The PF has accused the Hichilema administration of using the funeral to undermine Lungu's legacy and weaken the opposition. This narrative resonates with PF supporters, who see the government's actions as part of a broader pattern of targeting opposition figures. Conversely, UPND supporters argue that the government is acting in the national interest by ensuring a state funeral that reflects Lungu's status. These competing narratives have turned the burial into a political battleground, with each side rallying its base. The legal action in a foreign court has further inflamed tensions, with some PF supporters framing it as an affront to Zambian sovereignty, ironically echoing the government's own argument for repatriation. This paradox highlights the complexity of the issue, as both sides claim to represent the nation's interests while accusing the other of betrayal. Social impact. Beyond politics, the dispute has strained social cohesion. Funerals in Zambia are deeply cultural events, often serving as moments of reconciliation and unity. The inability to hold Lungu's funeral has left many Zambians feeling robbed of closure, particularly those who admired his presidency. The public's frustration is evident in social media posts, which describe the situation as a painful indictment of leadership and call for a resolution that prioritizes the family's grief. The delay in the burial has also sparked debates about the role of the state versus the family in such matters. Some Zambians support the government's position, viewing a state funeral as a necessary tribute to a former president. Others side with the family, arguing that their autonomy should take precedence. These differing views reflect broader questions about tradition, authority, and individual rights in Zambian society. Delay in national healing. The prolonged dispute has delayed Zambia's ability to mourn collectively and move forward. Lungu's presidency from 2015 to 2021 was a significant period in Zambia's history, marked by both achievements and controversies. His death offered an opportunity for reflection and reconciliation, allowing Zambians to acknowledge his contributions while addressing the divisions of his tenure. However, the legal chaos has shifted focus from mourning to conflict, preventing the nation from achieving closure. The delay also risks tarnishing Lungu's legacy. A protracted legal battle could overshadow his contributions, reducing his memory to a symbol of political strife. For a nation already grappling with economic challenges and political polarization, this dispute represents a missed opportunity for unity and healing. Political implications for PF and HH. Implications for the Patriotic Front PF. The dispute over Lungu's burial has significant implications for the PF, which has been struggling to maintain relevance since losing power in 2021. Lungu's death was a galvanizing moment for the party, rallying supporters around his legacy credibility and reinforcing their narrative of persecution under the UPND government. The PF has leveraged the funeral dispute to mobilize its base, portraying the government's actions as an attack on Lungu's memory and the opposition's dignity. However, the PF faces challenges in navigating this crisis. The party's alignment with the Lungu family's position risks escalating tensions with the government, potentially inviting further scrutiny or legal action against its leaders. The PF's ability to channel public outrage into political capital will depend on its messaging and organizational strength, both of which have been weakened since 2021. The dispute also highlights internal dynamics within the PF. Given Labinda's role as acting president suggests a leadership vacuum following Lungu's death, and the party's response to the burial issue will test its cohesion. A unified PF could emerge stronger, using the controversy to rally supporters ahead of future elections. Conversely, a misstep could deepen internal divisions and weaken the party's position. Implications for Hakainde Hichilema (HH). For President Hakainde Hichilema and the UPND, the burial dispute is a high-stakes challenge that could shape public perception of his leadership. Hichilema's administration has emphasized unity and good governance, but the legal battle risks portraying it as insensitive and authoritarian. The decision to pursue an injunction in a foreign court has been particularly controversial, with critics arguing that it prioritizes protocol over compassion. The outcome of the dispute will influence Hichilema's political capital. A successful resolution that balances the family's wishes with national protocol could strengthen his image as a unifying leader. However, a prolonged or poorly handled conflict could damage his credibility, particularly among Lungu supporters and neutral observers. The UPND's ability to manage public communication and engage with the Lungu family will be critical in mitigating these risks. The dispute also has implications for Hichilema's broader agenda. His administration has faced criticism for its handling of opposition figures, and the burial controversy could reinforce perceptions of political vendettas. As Zambia approaches future elections, Hichilema will need to demonstrate that he can rise above partisan conflicts to lead a divided nation. What happens next for the burial and Zambia? The next steps for Edgar Lungu's burial and Zambia's broader trajectory depend on the outcome of the legal proceedings and the ability of the government and the Lungu family to find common ground. Several scenarios are possible. Court rules in favor of the government. If the Pretoria High Court upholds the Zambian government's position, Lungu's body will likely be repatriated to Zambia for a state funeral. This would allow the government to organize a ceremony that reflects national protocol, potentially easing public tensions. However, the family's cooperation will be crucial to avoid further controversy. The government may need to offer concessions, such as incorporating the family's preferences into the funeral arrangements to ensure a dignified process. Court rules in favor of the family. If the court sides with the Lungu family, they may proceed with a private burial in South Africa. This outcome would affirm the family's autonomy, but could strain Zambia-South Africa relations and fuel domestic criticism of the government's handling of the issue. The PF could use this as a rallying point, accusing the government of failing to honor Lungu's legacy. Negotiated settlement. The most desirable outcome would be a compromise between the government and the family, facilitated by dialogue or mediation. This could involve repatriation with guarantees that the funeral reflects the family's wishes, such as a hybrid ceremony that combines state honors with private elements. Such a resolution would require both sides to overcome their distrust and prioritize national healing. Prolonged legal battle. If the dispute remains unresolved, the legal process could drag on, further delaying the burial and deepening public frustration. This scenario risks escalating political tensions and damaging Zambia's international reputation as the world watches how the country handles the death of a former leader. For Zambia, the resolution of this dispute will have lasting implications. A successful outcome could pave the way for reconciliation, allowing the nation to mourn Lungu collectively and move forward. However, a mishandled process could deepen divisions, undermine public trust in institutions, and complicate Hichilema's efforts to unify the country. In the immediate term, the government should focus on transparent communication and engagement with the Lungu family to build trust. The PF, meanwhile, will need to balance its advocacy for the family with efforts to avoid further polarization. The public's role will be crucial, as their reactions will shape the political fallout and the nation's path toward healing. Conclusion. The suspension of Edgar Lungu's burial is a multifaceted crisis that encapsulates legal, political, cultural, and emotional dimensions. The Zambian government's insistence on a state funeral clashes with the Lungu family's desire for autonomy, resulting in a legal battle that has delayed closure and divided the nation.